Well, thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be with you and our guests this afternoon, evening. This topic is really critical for the safety and security of our children. And so I'm glad that we're able to address this issue this afternoon. We really want our ministries to fulfill their purpose of expanding God's kingdom on earth. And so a safe, secure environment really is important. I was walking by an elementary school the other day, not far from where I work, and here was this soccer goal. And behind the soccer goal was a line of children, probably in fourth or fifth grade, and they were running up to the goal as fast as they could and running up as high as they could on the soccer goal and then running down the other side of this slanted portion. And I thought, that might not be the best activity for the young people. And as I got closer, I noticed that the sign on the back of the goal said, "Do not climb or sit on goals." And I thought, where are the teachers supervising this activity? Well, I kind of looked around the corner, and there they were, several of them, talking, chatting, and just basically standing in the shade because it was a warm day, obviously oblivious to this activity. Now, I point that out only because human nature being what it is, supervision is something that we sometimes take for granted. But what is the rationale for supervision? Shouldn't it be obvious that we need supervision for the safety and security of our children and youth? Of course. It's an obvious thing. Everybody wants our children to be safe and have a fulfilling experience in our church activities. But in many people's minds, supervision will take care of itself if there are adults present. And there's no doubt that the presence of adults will assist in many cases, but sadly, not all adults are good supervisors or even safe supervisors. And in even more extreme cases, they could even be perpetrators themselves. I recently had a project in which I looked at the most recent risk management files over the last 20 years that dealt with sex abuse. And here's what I discovered. From examining these files, these points really stood out. Not all adults know how to properly interact with children. Not all adults understand and practice proper supervision when given that task. And the incidence of child with child sex abuse has dramatically increased over the past 5 years. And as I examined these cases, one thing became very clear throughout. In almost every case, the opportunities for abuse was due to inadequate or improper supervision. This chart here shows the percentage of claims out of all of those sex abuse claims in which the child was the victim. Some cases, almost 90% in some years. The row at the bottom are the years 1994 through 2013. And this chart shows the trend of child with child claims that Adventist Risk Management has received. And this is really an alarming chart because of the proliferation of child with child incidences the last few years. So we need to take a good look at supervision, and what we're going to do today is look at several categories or several aspects of supervision. First of all, we're going to look at what it is and maybe even what it is not. We're going to look at a few very general principles of supervision that we hope can guide our guidelines that we will look at and the strategy for developing the supervision within each of your ministries. And then we're going to look at a typical Sabbath. Now, what I would like to point out is that our focus will primarily be on the daily church services. So what is supervision? If we look in the dictionary, it's to direct or oversee, to watch over as to maintain order, to provide protection, to be in charge of. But as I looked at these risk management claims that had been filed, what I saw was so much the antithesis, or what supervision was not. what I saw was that in many cases the duty had been abandoned or had been disregarded, or they just forgot, ignored, neglected, or simply passed over. So as we consider where we go with trying to determine what supervision is, as by the previous slide, and what it is not, we have to look at supervision from basically two standpoints. The first standpoint has to do with children's behaviors. We have, as it were, poor choices by our young people. Their brains are not fully developed. We have unruly children, and then, of course, we have these raging hormones amongst our teens. But we also have environmental issues that we have to look at: weather, traffic, walkways, stairs, electrical cords strung across pathways, cleaning supplies that maybe are not locked up, drapery, blinds, etc., that may be choking or strangling hazards for many of our young children. So the environment is an especially important area to look at. And the other element is the unexpected. What about the heat and the cold, the power outage, injuries, accidents, things that happen kind of out of the ordinary, stranger danger. A stranger wanders on to where we're supervising someone. We even have issues with unruly parents. We have vehicle breakdowns. When I was working as a student in college, I worked at the college cafeteria, and a friend of mine was carrying a tray of plates, must have been 50 of them. Well, somehow he slipped, the plates went down, and they crashed all over the tile floor in the back of the cafeteria. Our cafeteria director was a very stern lady. We were all very, very fearful of her, and we instantly looked to see how she would respond. What was interesting, though, was that she simply went over, got the broom, got a small shovel, got a big garbage can, and began to clean up. We rushed over and helped her. What this pointed out to me was that when something did happen, this woman knew how to act rather than to react to the situation. If she had let out a big scream, we would have acted differently. But we learned from the situation, and as supervisors, we need to learn that actions are really the more appropriate response than reactions. And when we're looking at supervision, there are issues of quantity, that is enough supervisors, and issues of quality, which is, of course, appropriately trained supervisors. Now, what we're probably not going to have time to look at today will be such events as pathfindering. We will not be able to look at travel. We have resources for this at adventistrisk.org. We have a wonderful little brochure on Pathfinders that our Vice President Arthur Blency has prepared. A number of the staff have prepared really fine resources. Travel including mission trips. We're not going to be talking today about the food banks or the Dorcas Society, as they used to be called. And we're not going to be looking at such things as Vacation Bible School. Now, throughout the presentation, I would like to open up and provide opportunity for questions. So if at any point you have questions, please jot them down, and we will proceed then and attempt to address as many of those questions as we can. Now, when we consider, David, are there any at this point, or should we just proceed?
Not at this time.
All right. The general principles involved, these are broad principles that really do focus on all types of supervision, whether it be at a church or a school, whether it be an on-campus activity, an on-site activity, or an off-site activity. These three principles, I think, are important for us to consider as we lay the groundwork for what it is that we're going to be considering later. Even though our focus will be primarily on the regular events of a typical Sabbath, these general principles I want to go over in a little more detail. First of all, supervision for the church should be an integral part of the local church safety program. Now, if your church doesn't have a safety program, a safety committee, or a safety officer, our website has many resources for helping to establish a safety program at a local church. And in this day and age, we cannot take safety for granted. So first of all, your supervision principles should all be mingled with those of the entire church safety program. Secondly, supervision in all church activities must be strategic. At the initial stage of whatever activity you're planning, whether it's the Sabbath School division that you lead out in, an outreach ministry, Pathfinders, Adventurers, a youth activity, or even such things as church board meetings, supervision should always be one of the initial considerations. And once you've made these, a written plan is best so that you can refer to them. And when planning for supervision of your particular activity, it's always good to include several individuals that have the same passion for safety that you do. A small committee of members really can bring a lot of insights together because collectively they have a lot of life experiences and they have insights. So don't go it alone. I've identified, with the help of my colleagues, basically 13 guidelines that you can use for supervision. These come from a number of sources, including the NAD directives, ARM, our experiences, and just good old common sense. Number one, always have a minimum of 2 adults supervising children and youth at all times. This can be a challenge. And sometimes it's important for us to make the case for safety with other people in order to get more people involved in the supervision. Observe the 6-month rule for new volunteers. Someone moves into the church, a family that no one knows. We really don't know if they're safe for our children. So the NAD recommends that we wait 6 months before allowing them to move into the role of supervisors. Our doors must always have vision panels or windows in our classrooms and even in our office doors. This is critical for your protection as well as it is for us observing other things going on. If at all possible, never be alone with a child. But in the event that you unavoidably find yourself alone with a child, you can safeguard the situation in part by first of all contacting the parents immediately. And if you can't reach the parents, contact a trusted individual explaining the situation and your attempt to contact the parent. If you must continue to wait with a child alone, do so in a very public area because this is for the safety of the child and you as well. Background, screened, and trained all volunteers, as mandated by the North American Division, should use the services of someone like Shield the Vulnerable or other quality service. In addition, all supervisors need to agree and sign and support and enforce the NAD Code of Conduct. Do not allow distractions. Number 6, cell phones, texting. All of these things, conversations, use of computer, tablets, all of these things distract from your focus on the safety of the children. If a call is necessary, make it brief, but coordinate with the other adult. That will safeguard you and the children as well. You
Bill,
must always be engaged at all times, almost as if you are a swimming pool lifeguard. So the ground rules, the first half of these ground rules really have to do with paying attention. Put the cell phone away. Texting is not acceptable during this time. Now, there may be emergencies, but in general, just leave it alone. It can wait. You focus on what you're going to do and be there. Be there with your mind, your body, and your spirit. Now, let's look at the second half of the 13 guidelines. Bathrooms. Are you kidding? Bathrooms? Well, we must be especially vigilant of the time spent by our young people in bathrooms. Bathrooms should always be monitored. The mere presence of an adult in a bathroom will deter the opportunities for abuse because, sadly, restrooms have shown up as recently as the study that I've done as the venues for same-sex assaults in our churches and schools. Now, obviously, there has to be a lot of thought in this process. There has to be guidance. There has to be an effective way to monitor a bathroom that has a single stall where you would stand outside, or a double stall, double urinal stalls or toilet stalls. where a supervisor can step in and step out if need be. But bathrooms is a problem in our churches and in our schools. So don't think that's necessarily a safe place. There are a number of areas that should always be off limits to children, and I will show a slide later that talks about what we should not allow our children, where we should not allow our children to go. Number 10, areas not in use should always be locked. If an area is not able to be locked, regular supervision should be included in that area, and children must be told that those areas are off limits and that should be strictly enforced. Wherever there is low-level lighting, whether it be perhaps in a basement or in a dark classroom or outside in the evening, well-lit illumination during these activities is critical. Nighttime activities can always pose special problems and require additional supervision. Parking lot supervision. Yep, parking lots. Throughout the church day, parking lots should be a part of the regular supervision perhaps by deacons or other assigned supervisors. Not only does it serve to supervise wayward children, but it can also be a crime deterrent in your parking lot. And additionally, families and maybe the elderly might need assistance, and visitors might get some instruction and directions from you. So those, well, we have off-site considerations. I'll be brief on these because we have other resources for these, because it involves many times travel, overnight activities, and other types of things that are covered in some of the other resources that we would not have time to go into today. In our off-site activities, just in general, make sure that you have the names of all the children and youth recorded with you, but with a duplicate list left at a trusted adult who was not going on the event with you. Make sure that you have the medical and parent permission forms, and they must always be filled out and taken with you so that if there is a medical emergency, the best treatment can be administered and parents can be notified. And all of these additional resources are on the Adventist Risk Management website. So we've looked at 3 principles, we've looked at 13 guidelines, but now let's look at establishing a specific strategy for your specific ministry. The first thing you must do when you're beginning to look at what you must do for supervision is assessment. What is the activity? Has it been approved by the church board? And this is an important step, because if you have an activity, let's say you wanted to take a youth group water skiing as a church activity, and maybe somebody has an accident or is injured. The line between your personal insurance and the church's insurance will certainly be clarified if your event has been approved by the church board. So protect yourself by getting the activities approved. Plan ahead. You also must consider the location and the environmental factors, including some of those we previously mentioned. If you choose to take a nature walk around or near a church, as we used to do down in Georgia, well, are there poisonous plants? Could there be snakes? You watch out for the weather and be prepared with perhaps an alternate activity. Equipment and supplies. Am I using equipment or supplies that could cause hazards if used improperly? Is the equipment in good working order? And even handouts to Cradle Roll Sabbath School should always be checked for maybe loose items that could become choking hazards or poking hazards or carriers of germs. Be forward thinking. What could a young person with a short attention span and poor judgment do in a particular situation? Am I exposing the children unnecessarily with this event? Be creative, but plan carefully. Avoid surprises. Interesting illustration by our colleague John Dugan. The second aspect of planning your activity is personnel. How many staff will I need? How many do I need to account for the safety and security of our children? Now, the younger children are such that more supervision is generally necessary. And we have, of course, in the Cradle Roll divisions of Sabbath School, many parents that will come in, and that really does help. And additionally, if you have an event that is more in the public domain, maybe some sort of an outreach, additional supervision is required. The greater the risk, The greater the supervision, numbers are necessary. Some churches establish ratios for the age and number of sponsors. When I was taking my second grade daughter to SeaWorld, I was the only dad supervisor in a school bus full of moms and kids. And we had three. I supervised three young ladies, my daughter and two of her friends. And for the record, I was the only supervisor that lost my charges at SeaWorld, but that's a very long story that we don't have time to go into. But they all arrived home safely and promised not to tell. Careful consideration should be given if you establish ratios. And again, certain activities will require more supervision. What ages could be used for supervisors? Because we can marshal the forces of our youngsters in church. With adult assistance, teens can be used, younger children even can be used to assist with crafts or other low-risk activities. A sound judgment, again, should be used when using minor supervisors, and adults should always be present in overseeing the young supervisors. This is both for the safety and the education of our young volunteers. At the church that I attend, there are many junior deacons and deaconesses, always under the supervision of adults. And are the supervisors experienced in the activity present? You wouldn't take somebody that doesn't know how to water ski to be a water ski boat driver. You'd have to be very uninformed to do such a thing. Adults should always operate the power equipment if you're doing certain activities. If it has a motor or plugs into the wall, it should almost always be left to an adult. Do I need both male and female supervisors? When we have very young children, many times the female supervisors will dominate, and that's perfectly fine. But as young boys grow up, there needs to be in the Sabbath School divisions of the probably starting in the kindergarten age, primary, needs to be an adult to be able to escort the young boys to the bathroom if need be. So you consider, do I need, if I have an all-boy group, do I need women sponsors? Probably not. But always be considerate of the age of the young person and the sexes of the young person. And the third aspect is training and screening. And this is really critical. As we look at training and screening, are they all background screened? Are they all trained? And as we look at the possibilities for our background screening and training, one of the organizations that we have used widely throughout the North American Division is Shield the Vulnerable. And Shield the Vulnerable, I don't believe I have their website here, but it's www.shieldthevulnerable.org. They have both the training, they are outstanding courses that teach several aspects of supervision. Number one, they teach you how to spot the potential for abuse and how to report that. They also teach you how to look at what maybe the qualities or the techniques of a perpetrator is. But almost as important as all of that is how we should act appropriately with children. And when everyone in a Sabbath school, in a church, in any activity, if everyone has gone through the same training, then there is a common understanding about how we should act around our children, the appropriate ways we should deal with children, and we all then have a common understanding that really does lead to a culture of awareness. The last aspect of putting your program together is oversight. Oversight is really important from the very beginning of your activity to the end of your activity. Oversight, effective oversight, is for the benefit and education of the children and the supervisors. Each minor supervisor must know that assistance is available if needed and that someone has their back. In addition, it will serve as a reminder for them to always practice appropriate behavior around children. The knowledge of oversight of our younger supervisors is a powerful deterrent for curbing improper behavior. The second aspect is The next aspect is communication. It's really essential with effective oversight. Each supervisor needs to know exactly what is expected of them, what specific tasks they are responsible for, and what the lines of communication should be. Some activities may require walkie-talkies or numbers on cell phones, etc., and that's particularly true for off-site events. Oversight begins with the very first arrival of any supervisor or child, and it continues until the last child and supervisor has left. And so we welcome you to the wonderful world of Adventist Children's Ministries. Yes, it's fun, it's exciting. There are challenging activities, there are high risks, but you're helping children to make a lifelong decision for Jesus. And in summary, we look at supervision. Is it just warm bodies? No. It is diligent oversight by qualified individuals in adequate numbers for the protection and the vital ministries that we have, because we do have an adversary who is a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. Let's take a quick look at the Sabbath day from beginning to end. The Sabbath day, for many congregations, is a very long day. Pastors, this is your day to work hard. Ministry leaders, the same thing. So many things go on throughout the day, but we can't lose sight of the supervision responsibilities that we have in any Sabbath day. Let's begin with pre-Sabbath school. Generally, the only supervision issues that arise with pre-Sabbath school is with the children of those preparing for Sabbath school. As a rule, I would suggest that parents keep their children in their room with them until there is adequate supervision in the children's Sabbath school division. As a regular practice, we need to designate individuals, usually deacons, to be assigned to supervise all common areas, including parking lots, hallways, breezeways, playgrounds, bathrooms, and the church foyer, both for the supervision of unruly children and for the assistance of those in need or maybe asking directions, as we mentioned before. So we go from pre-Sabbath school to Sabbath school. If you are the only adult as a child arrives for Sabbath school, you must leave the door open, be sure the vision panel is not covered, and make sure that you're visible to all who pass by. And for your own protection, you may want to have a deacon or another adult stand in there with you if there's only one child. Because if there's an emergency, then and other children have arrived, then what do you do if you're the only adult in there? So it is important during the Sabbath school to have more than one. I have been to a number of youth Sabbath schools and early teen Sabbath schools where there's one person in there, one person playing the guitar, one person telling the Bible story or the lesson study, one person doing everything. There really must be other individuals assisting parents who need to understand the importance of supervision and understand the dangers that can exist by not having adequate supervision in our Sabbath schools. Now, we go to the in-between, Sabbath school and church. Now, children many times will run wild after Sabbath school and before church, and it is at these times that our designated adults, many times the deacons, should assist in maintaining order as well as supervising common areas as mentioned above. When we get to church, generally the primary supervisory task will be to continue to supervise all common areas, including parking lots. Be sure that areas that are no longer in use are secure and locked and that no one is inside. Then we get to potluck. Again, general church supervision is really important at this time. Children have been sitting for a while, they are hungry, they may have low blood sugar, and those tasked with the general supervision should continue to maintain their vigilance in all areas, especially, again, parking lots, playground areas, if you're connected to a school, and the fellowship hall or wherever the potluck is being served. Younger children should not be allowed in the kitchen, ever. And care must be shown to keep children from running around. Running children and feeble elders can end badly. Those supervising the potluck area must always be on guard for spilled food. Slips, trips, and falls are a major cause of insurance claims. Spills should be cleaned immediately and a sign placed appropriately over the wet area to warn of the wet floor. The in-between time, in between church and during potluck, is a prime time for our teens to find a private location for their romantic activities. And speaking of that, some of the most dangerous times will occur during church down times. The tradition in some churches is for the members to remain at church all day. And the down times can be difficult to supervise, but it is critical to monitor those times, as they have been prime times for teens to find isolated areas in unlocked classrooms or offices or other remote areas and engage in inappropriate behavior. The ARM claims files are witness to these facts. In some churches, it will take a complete paradigm shift in the supervisory strategy to include these downtimes. And youth activities and after Vespers, perhaps the most challenging of all age group, are our young teens. As mentioned earlier, various cultural and social pressures, along with varying stages of physical and mental development, require great care when planning activities. And then the necessary supervision to keep our children, our youth, safe and secure is very, very important. There is simply no way or no excuse for a youth event to be supervised by a youth pastor alone, and I've seen it many times. There must be help from other staff, from youth parents, of course, all screened and background checked so they are safe to be supervising. Because of time constraints, we can't go further into the youth activities. However, in future webinars, we'll focus directly on more of the instruction for supervising our young people, particularly as they go off of the church property. In general, though, there are a number of areas that are completely off limits to our children, almost regardless of age. And I've mentioned a few, but here are a few more. They must stay out of the kitchen. That's a dangerous place ever for children. The mechanical rooms where they have the furnace and the water heaters and storing chemicals. The janitor closet, again, chemicals and cleaning supplies, things that children must not be exposed to. They should never get into the audiovisual control room. We've seen some very embarrassing things happen when children have been allowed unsupervised in the audiovisual control room. They must stay out of the baptistry. Many hazards can be there. They must stay out of the offices unless perhaps they're accompanied by their parent. Any unattended room like a fellowship hall, mother's room, gymnasium if it's attached to a school, if the church is attached to a school, or playground areas, all must be completely off limits. And I mention roof only because there's an amusing anecdote by our vice president, Arthur Blency, who walked into church one day and saw his son, he was very young at the time, on the roof of the church. And he said, "What are you doing there?" Well, his son said, "Oh, we just climbed up through the closet and got on the roof." And Arthur said, "Well, you show me." So sure enough, son came down, got his dad, took him around to a closet that was unlocked. And there was a ladder that opened to an unlocked hatch on the roof where Arthur's son and several boys were playing. So take it from me and take it from Arthur. We must be vigilant in what we do. In conclusion, let's look at some of the broad areas that we've gone over. We have to have a plan when we supervise. It can't just be warm bodies. The guidelines must be established, enforced, and written down. Our staff have to be trained, screened, background checked, and they must be there in adequate numbers in order for us to have this vitally important ministry. And don't forget to pray. We're human, and we make mistakes. And the devil is out there as a roaring lion. But prayer unites us. Prayer demonstrates our faith. It elevates our activity to the throne of grace. Prayer will model to our young supervisors spiritual connection to God. And these prayers will be answered by God. And then in the end, we offer a prayer of thanksgiving. We need to make a difference in what we do. We need to take supervision seriously. The claims files indicate that is the weakness in so many of the activities that we have as a church. David, at this time, I'll certainly turn this over to any questions that may have come up. It's been a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. The ministry of risk management is to protect your ministry, and our only hope is that some of this advice can provide direction and guidance as each of your churches continue to do God's will.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chunestudy. Really appreciate your thoughts today. We do have several questions in the lineup here.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and get to those. If anyone else is thinking of a question, now is a great time to get them into the lineup, because we're going to be going through at least 4, and you'll want to get in there before we close. So the first question is a good one. Does the 6-month rule mean that the person, the new member or attendee at church, cannot be used at all during this time period?
No, let me clarify that. The 6-month rule, and if someone comes into your church and volunteers to assist as a supervisor, we're first of all singing their praises. But during the first 6 months, they should always be under the watchful eye of another supervisor that has been proven to be uh, background screened and trained. And during this time, they need to go through the training and the background screening. So yes, when there's a volunteer that comes into church, utilize them to their fullest, but always under the watchful eye of another supervisor.
Okay, great. Thank you. Um, Here's an unusual, scary situation, and let's see what you might recommend here. The question is, what would be the correct action in a situation when some of our teenagers um, were offered money for sex by a random stranger at a gas station as they were out on one of these activities involving some travel, or as they were in front of a store waiting for other members of the team who are either shopping or in the restroom or whatever? I guess the question really boils down to, does the activity leader call for emergency services, call the police at that point, or do they personally just confront the person making that inappropriate offer?
In my limited wisdom, the first question I would have is, where was the supervisor in this? And if the supervisor was present and this was indeed an event that happened, the first thing that I would do would be to call the authorities and indicate that someone was inappropriately approaching our young people. One of the problems that we have in our church is the reticence of people to involve the authorities, even the welfare overseers and protective services, police and sheriff immediately contact someone when teens are being offered things such as this. We must involve those who are trained and prepared to deal with individuals. Our supervisors, our youth leaders are likely not trained to deal with the individual directly. So the first thing would be to establish the safety of the young people, move them away from that situation, and then contact the authorities.
All right, thank you. Okay, here's the next question. Do you recommend getting board approval for a teacher who would like to have Sabbath school and or church at their home? Is written permission needed from the parents as well?
I believe, David, that first of all, yes, I would ask for board approval. It protects you, protects the church, because the questions are going to be asked. Well, is this something you did in behalf of the church? If so, yes. Well, what do you have to show that it was an official church activity? Well, nothing. So yes, I would definitely get board approval, and you need to be proactive. These things are many times spur of the moment, and I recognize that. But whenever you would have children over at your home, if your church requires parental permission and medical for any outing away from the church, then I would recommend yes that they have parental permission to go. That's kind of a blanket policy that most churches should have, that if there is an activity off site, off of the site of the grounds of the church, it is always a safe thing to have parental permission, because also on that parental permission, you have then the elements of contact. You know how to contact the parents. You know if there's any kind of a medical emergency, what to do if they're not right there with their parents. So I would definitely recommend getting permission and board approval.
Yeah, agreed. All right. Another question here. Um, well, it looks like that one was more of a comment, just referring to the fact that in many school activities seem to only have one teacher, trying to accomplish all of this two-person supervision. I know that's a real concern, but there wasn't a question there per se.
Well, I certainly understand that. I worked for many years as a contract teacher, one morning a week at a elementary school that had, I believe it was four teachers, and what they always tried to do was to coordinate rooms so that there were almost always two rooms at recess at the same time, and at least always more than one room at lunch at the same time. So there could be more than one supervisor in a particular area. Also, they did a really good job of asking parents to come in during physical education, during lunchtime, during recess. And there are many parents who are looking for ways to help. Many parents are not able to, and they're very, very busy and work all day and can't get away. But I would encourage a school to marshal the forces of their parents of their children and assist during these times of supervision.
And grandparents. I know I've
And
seen a lot of great
thank you.
grandparents helping
You're
out.
absolutely right. And since I am a grandparent, nothing would make me happier than supervising children.
Absolutely. One last question, and if anyone has another one, we are getting to the end of the questions, so please get them in. Um, what if a group decides to go on a hike on Sabbath afternoon? Just kind of a spur of the moment thing. The weather turns out to be really nice, and they decide to go. What can one do, I guess, in that kind of a situation to make sure there's adequate supervision?
Well, the most important thing is don't go if you don't have adequate supervision. And if it's in a dense wooded area, you'll need to have more supervisors than you would if it were a fairly open, large nature path that meanders around. So make sure you have adequate supervision. But you also will need to get the permission. And sometimes that's hard to get. But it is a safeguard for you as a supervisor, for the church, for the conference, for you to have secured the permission of the young person to go off of the grounds of the church. So I definitely recommend taking those steps, if even if it's a spur of the moment. And those are hard to do. I recognize that it's tough to pull people together for that. But there's got to be a parent out there that is supervised, that has taken the course, that is that can get up off of the sofa after having eaten a large potluck lunch and go with you on that hike.